Thanks to me, you shall be the superior Last Angry Geek.
Dr. Quadruped, you unholy bastard.
Unholy?
Oh, sorry, I meant to say unethical. Silly day. You unethical bastard, what are you going to do to me?
I'm going to make you superior, thanks to science.
This is getting dangerously close to infringing on Insano. What are you going to do to me?
Oh, I don't know. How about this?
Oh. I'm the same.
Are you?
Yes, I'm exactly the same. How does that make me superior?
That's nonsense. You're at least 5 pounds lighter. Trust me, your heart will thank me.
Enjoy the show.
Oh, thank you, I will.
Oh, shut up. Mad scientist being the archenemy to a guy who reviews a comic book. Oh, hi everyone! Welcome back to Comic Book Issues. I'm your host, the Last Angry Geek. Well, you asked for it. No, you really asked for it in every way imaginable. This is Superior Spider-Man, number 15 and 16. When Dan Slott took over Amazing Spider-Man as sole writer, the first arc he did with artist Humberto Ramos was Big Time, which got Peter a scientist's job at Horizon Labs and introduced us to Peter's twisted counterpart, Phil Urich. Phil had been the former good Green Goblin and then joined a superhero support group, the Loners. However, his exposure to Norman Osborn's Goblin gear drove him insane. He was now living in New York, relying on his uncle, Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich, for support. As a cult of personality grew around the ex-Green Goblin Norman Osborn, Phil tried to cash in on the fame, eventually becoming the new Hobgoblin. He gave footage of himself to Daily Bugle reporter Nora Winters, whom he started dating, and earned big bucks on the side as the Kingpin's henchman. The superior Spider-Man of this story is none other than Otto Octavius, the former Dr. Octopus. With his body broken and dying after years of battling Spider-Man, he pulled the ultimate switcheroo. He trapped Peter in his dying body and placed his mind in Peter's healthy body. With access to all his memories, Otto realized what a dick he'd been and promised the dying Peter to use his Spider-Man identity for good. Otto promised that he would be a superior Spider-Man to Peter's version. Peter is dead, and only Otto remains. Slott thus managed to create the greatest Spider-Man controversy since One More Day. To say that the book has become controversial is like saying One More Day was well received by fans and critics alike. In the previous issue of Superior Spider-Man, Spock, that's the affectionate fan nickname for Otto's Spider-Man, decided to take down the Kingpin and called upon his mercenary army and a giant spider mecha to destroy the Kingpin's headquarters. The Hobgoblin escaped, in part because both sides are being manipulated by a new Green Goblin. Well, there you go. That's where we stand as of issue 15. A giant spider mech? What? How did he afford that? Okay, the first person who brings out a Spider-Man credit card, I will go medieval on them. Issue 15 opens with the Hobgoblin arriving at the shop of the Tinkerer. The super genius is none too pleased that Phil just walked into his store in broad daylight, but nonetheless agrees to build and repair his weapons. He then puts Ty Stone, a disgraced Horizon Labs scientist, to work on them. However, Ty wants revenge on the Hobgoblin for bullying him while he was working for the Kingpin. In the ruins of the Shadowlands, Spock oversees the search for Wilson Fisk's remains. Carly Cooper, Peter's ex-girlfriend and crime scene investigator, steals a moment with him, and he admits that he's been receiving financing from Mayor J. Jonah Jameson. They find the remains of Fisk's double and declare the Kingpin dead. Carly tells her captain she's more certain than ever that something's wrong. She doesn't believe the city is paying for mecha and mercenaries. If they follow the money, they'll discover Spider-Man's secrets. Captain Watanabe promises to help, but as her alter ego, the Wraith. At the Daily Bugle, Phil delivers footage of the destruction of the Shadowlands to his grateful girlfriend, Nora. Later, realizing newspaper money is not as good as criminal money, he's contacted by Roderick Kingsley. The former Hobgoblin now has his own business, licensing supervillain identities to other criminals. If Phil doesn't pay him off, he'll quote-unquote end their contract. He recommends robbing a bank, or 3. Spider-Man gets furious that somehow Hobgoblin is avoiding his web of spider bots that monitor the city. He sets his minions out to find Phil. Minions. He actually calls them minions. How has no one figured out he's evil? I mean, for God's sakes, calling your, well, not sidekicks, but your followers minions? That's like sign number one that something ain't right in the old brain box.
Meanwhile, fake Peter's private life continues to suffer as he ignores real Peter's friends, family, and job in the pursuit of the Hobgoblin. Upset that Phil is somehow evading him, Otto wonders if being Peter isn't holding him back. He never had to worry about a secret identity as Dr. Octopus and considers retiring Parker until he gets a call from Anna Maria, a teaching assistant he's begun to develop feelings for. Elsewhere in the Green Goblin's underground lair...
You know, I've been hosting this show for a while now, and that might be the first time I've ever used the word lair. It's the little things that make this job so rewarding.
As I was saying, in his lair, the Green Goblin explains to one of his lieutenants that the Hobgoblin has gotten lucky. He hacked into Spider-Man's computer web and programmed it to ignore any Goblin-related activity, intending it only to profit himself and the Goblin cult that serves him. At Empire State University, where Peter has been continuing his education, the Chancellor allows Peter a full credit based on his tremendous test scores and in spite of his missed classes. Afterwards, Anna, who's a little person, explains she picked Peter's pocket. She knows he's working for Spider-Man and needed him focused on his real life for a bit. His spider alarm has been going off for minutes. He's too smitten to be mad, and they flirt just a bit before he leaves.
I feel like we should tread carefully here. I don't want to play that there's anything wrong with this character, certainly not her stature. But then this is Otto Octavius, a man who once thought that Aunt May was a catch. I'm not sure we should trust his judgment in women.
At the site of another Hobgoblin robbery, Ty reveals he's installed trackers in Hobgoblin's new gear, and he's alerted the proper authority, Spider-Man. Spock attacks the Hobgoblin, asking how he's been able to avoid him. Phil has no idea what he's going on about and tries to decapitate him, but the flame sword fails. Ty has remotely shut it off. Otto activates claws built into his gloves, stabs the Hobgoblin, who then takes off. The gloves contain trackers. He listens in and hears a frantic Phil Urich demand an advance from the Bugle to make up for the bungled robbery. Otto hacks into the city's infrastructure and begins broadcasting, calling for the citizens to report the whereabouts of Phil Urich, the Hobgoblin.
Man, I love a good accusation. One of my lifelong ambitions was to charge into a room and say, "That man is a murderer!" I'd like to apologize to my cousin Kelly for doing it at her wedding.
Robbie Robertson, the Bugle's editor-in-chief, warns that anyone who contacts the outside world right now will be fired. Phil's Uncle Ben pleads to Robbie that this must be a mistake, as Nora demands that Phil tell her he isn't the Hobgoblin. She realizes that there's been a connection all along, but she's never looked too hard at how Phil got the Hobgoblin pictures, as they benefited her. However, the cops immediately show up outside the Bugle, and Phil cracks under the strain. Spock heads toward the Bugle, contacting Spider Patrol number 3, who are closest. They head into their mech, but one of their number is yanked off screen. Otto arrives. Robbie chastises him for making an unproven accusation public. However, Otto admits to injecting nanotracers into the Hobgoblin and being led here. Phil finally snaps and whips out his flame sword, taking Nora hostage. In his secret laboratory...
Wow. First lair, now secret laboratory? This is a red letter day for comic book issues.
Of course! Don't you know anything about science?
Hey, I told you, we're not doing that character.
In his secret laboratory, Ty Stone is thrilled the Hobgoblin is going down and decides to let him keep his weapons operational, so Phil will go down in a bloody standoff. The Wraith interrogates the missing Spider Soldier. He claims that the money he's being paid is legit, something the tech in her suit confirms. Back at her computer, Barbara Gordon, aka Oracle, Carly Cooper, hacks into the Minion's files and traces his money to an offshore bank account. She knows Peter Parker is financially inept and decides Wraith will follow the money to the Caymans. Back at the Bugle, Nora elbows herself out of Phil's grasp. Knowing Spider-Man's tech makes him immune, Phil decides to kill everyone around him with his goblin laugh, a devastating sonic attack built into his body. He only stops when he sees his Uncle Ben in agony. That's all the time Otto needs to blow up the tracers in Phil's body.
And in other news, former Daily Bugle photographer and alleged Hobgoblin Phil Urich died today from massive internal hemorrhaging. According to one paramedic, it was as if his heart and lungs were blown up from the inside. When reached for a comment, Spider-Man had this to say.
I detonated several miniature explosives I placed next to his heart. How was I to know something would go wrong?
We now return you to your regularly scheduled program. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Spider-Man tells Phil the bombs are more for shock value as he tackles him out the Bugle window. The police are there to arrest him as we go to live coverage. They interview Turbo from the Loners, who tells of his initial mental illness, and they even cover his brief time as the good Green Goblin. At his lair, the current evil Green Goblin decides that Spider-Man's a fool for not using Phil's secret identity as leverage, while recognizing that the Hobgoblin irritated Spidey much more than usual. He sends someone that I can only assume to be a new Menace to get Yurik.
Oh, Menace was another of those great ideas that came out of the post-One More Day era known as Brand New Day. She was the daughter of a politician turned into a Green Goblin groupie supervillain. It seemed like Harry Osborn might be the father of her baby. Then it turned out that Norman Osborn, Harry's father, might be, and you people tuned out as soon as I said One More Day, didn't you?
Surrounded by the cops, Spider Patrol, and the wall crawler himself, Phil Yurik surrenders. Otto picks up the flaming sword, knowing that Phil's built-in sonic laugh makes him dangerous even without his Hobgoblin gear, and seems to be considering a more permanent ending when his communicator rings. Captain America's contacting him. He's heard about the giant robots and personal army. He reminds fake Peter that he's currently on probation from the Avengers, and that they'll be in touch about his recent actions. He turns Phil over to the cops before going on camera to thank the people of New York for helping him bring down the Hobgoblin. In the aftermath, Robbie is forced to suspend Ben until the public forgets about his connection to the Hobgoblin and fires Nora. She and Phil were a team, and any leads he brought in were tainted. On the way out of town, Phil's police van is bombed, and Menace rips off the roof to rescue him. In the Green Goblin's lair, although no one will confirm if it's Norman Osborn, Phil watches as the press hounds J. Jonah Jameson about his escape, and Spider-Man denounces the city's incompetence. Phil is given a new costume identity and brought before the Green Goblin. He promises to deliver Spider-Man to his new master, and is rechristened the Goblin Knight.
So with Phil's identity now established as the Goblin Knight, hopefully we'll get a trilogy, and it'll all be wrapped up in the Goblin Knight Rises.
He's not the Hobgoblin you deserve, but the one you need. Number one, make it so.
I still think Bane sounds like Patrick Stewart. So there are a lot of people who have refused to read this book simply because Doc Ock has replaced Peter Parker as the protagonist. It's one of the most controversial moves in recent memory, but it's my job to be fair. So what did I think about this title? Let's take a closer look.
First off, the obvious problem here is that we're 14 issues into the continuity of this title, and I have no idea what's happening. However, that's not Dan Slott's fault, as I haven't been reading the story until now, so if I find elements confusing, I'm going to have to believe that they were set up in earlier issues and go from there. I will admit that the writing is pretty good. Slott isn't writing a watered-down version of Peter Parker, he's writing Dr. Octopus living Peter Parker's life. There's a newfound arrogance in Spider-Man's actions. He's not used to explaining himself, nor does he really feel the need. It's even reflected in the art as he stands straight up, jaw out, shoulders back, as if he's ready to defy everyone. However, for a book that's titled Superior Spider-Man, this is easily a Hobgoblin story. You could say they co-star in the first issue as we explore both Otto and Phil's lives, but by the second issue it's almost all Phil, except for the end, when Otto is dealing with the consequences of his witch hunt. In fact, in the second issue, we never see Otto out of costume and have to follow Phil as his life collapses around him. That I do see as a flaw. If I mind a book about Spider-Man, I want to read about Spider-Man. That's not to say you can't give some interesting stories to the sporty cast, but aside from Anna and Carly, none of Spider-Man's cast get more than a cursory glance in the first issue. I don't know much about Anna, so I won't comment on the character, other than it feels a little too cliche to make Otto's love interest someone with a smart brain and a physical defect. Carly, a character I hated in Brand New Day, at least has been kept relevant to the book as the one person who doesn't think Peter is Peter. It gives the character something to do, completely in keeping with her background as a crime scene investigator. Although I do wish a word box or two could have been spared for the Wraith. I have absolutely no idea who this character is or why she's working with Carly, but again, that's on me for jumping into the middle of a book that's been out for a year. The ending has a nice hook as the ongoing storyline of the Green Goblin seizing power in New York continues to gain momentum. Otto and Gabi are heading towards an eventual showdown, and we've seen that when pushed, Otto responds with brutality. Could this eventual confrontation lead to his inevitable downfall? Let's briefly talk about Humberto Ramos' art. Some hate it. I, like some others, love it. It's a neat blend of anime meets Jack Kirby. It can be a bit blocky and overly static at times, but there's a definite energy to it, and you can't deny that Ramos has a style uniquely his own. I won't say it's for everyone, but in my mind, Ramos' art is a great selling point for any book.
The minute that Otto replaced Peter's Spider-Man, there was an outrage in this title not seen since the Clone Saga. I know people hate this book on principle and would love nothing more than for me to slam it, but it's really not that bad a title. It's kind of fascinating to follow Otto around and see how he's redirecting Peter's life, destroying some relationships and building new ones.
The thing you have to remember is that Marvel and DC love the status quo. Peter will be back. It's inevitable. But in the meantime, Dan Slott is doing something truly unique with one of Marvel's flagship titles, and loving Peter Parker doesn't mean you can't put the character on the shelf for a bit and follow Otto around. I give Superior Spider-Man number 15 and 16 2.5 stars out of 5. Until next time, true believers, this is Comic Book Issues, and I'm your host, The Last Angry Geek.